Right, this is going to be another episode of Counterpoints. Obviously, this is going to be the first one in this iteration of Counterpoints where it's not Moses going like, yeah, the same thing about Phelps going through the murder hole on Mirage. That's such a deep cut if anyone knows it. It's one of those things that like got caught in Moses' brain when he did analysis back in the day. He did repeat 7 billion times. So anyway, obviously now it's with Maniac and we do more of like the nerd version of the show where we actually do talk about like the tournaments and the matches. This is going to be the first episode with a guest. Obviously, Janko has been on many shows before, but I actually thought, Janko, what's good is we can sort of go into both domains with you. We can talk about like the actual game stuff and player performance, etc. But we can also do some of the more spicy scene topics, which generally we haven't done as much on this show, but I thought it'd be a good angle to do it from. So one thing I actually thought, you know my style, Jan, because nobody beating around the bush, mate, like setting it up. Like, my style is just a quickie in a broom closet. You just fuck, you want to fuck them. There you go, right, that's it, we're in now. You want the whole dinner, fucking roses. So let's just get in there. Like, the first thing I actually do want to talk about with you is this. So because of the whole bleed thing with Kassad, fair play to HooXi. He saw the meme angle. He has leveled up that aspect of the G2 meta of social media. He saw the angle. Look, fair play. If you know like WWE and like wrestling promotion, that is the best angle to do that meme on of like, I saw the Kassad, I was watching you resign from the team or whatever, where fair play, you are using his shit against him. That's what I would do or any other analyst would do. Like, it's a good angle, but it actually just made me think again of that topic. And one thing I've always wanted to do is, obviously, on my shows that I have with Kassad, we've talked many times about HooXi and G2 and Nico and all that stuff. But actually, in general, Janko, I notice you haven't really like weighed in on that topic too much. Like, you will evaluate G2, obviously, and how they're doing and all that stuff. But I actually wanted to know, where do you come down on essentially the HooXi question? Because the HooXi question to me goes at this, Janko. It's not, is he a decent in-game leader? I mean, you can't win trophies that he's won if you had total shit and you just do nothing and you really just die in the server. Like that, that's obviously a ridiculous straw man. But the question to me goes at this, Janko. It's essentially like, I'll give you the analogy. I'll give you a football analogy. It would be like if someone asks, should Erik ten Hag be the coach of Man United? Right? He's actually already shown he must have coaching skills and he's already done an all right job with Man United. Right? The question is, though, if someone's a big Man United fan, they think Man United should be number one, then they're going to say, no, he hasn't done a good enough job. But if someone's maybe more of a pragmatist, they might say, actually, he's doing an all right job. Maybe we'll stick with him for now and like consider the circumstance. So where do you actually come down on this? Because obviously the question, I feel like that infects this, is what people think about Nico. Because if people want Nico to win the major today, they're going to want him to have the best possible IGL. So where do you come down on the big, like, is HooXi the right IGL for G2 angle? Where do you come down on this, Janko?
I think, first of all, when you said football, I thought you were going to use the good football analogy, not this.
Maniac doesn't follow that stuff, mate. I had to make it,
That comes from a European. Why is European making this reference?
Okay. Because I know America has the best everything. No, but I think the question would be, would you ever think like Trent Dilfer can win a Super Bowl?
Of course,
or your team could win a Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer as quarterback. Well, if you have the Baltimore Ravens 2000 defense, then sure you can. So for me, it's from the very get-go, people have been very quick to attack HooXi because of his individual performances, right? And the lack thereof. But as anyone very well knows, it's really about how the team functions as a whole. And you will certainly remember back when Zeus was first removed from the team in Navi, right? And Seized came in. I think Seized was in gaming for a while. And Simple came in and all this stuff. They were worse. They were worse than they were before, even though Simple was already coming in as one of the best players in the world. I can't remember like around that time where he was in the HLTV rankings, but certainly on the way up. And it's because whether it's the in-game leader can't do a good enough job, or the roles don't mesh as well, or there isn't like a person who is going to sacrifice his individual game for the betterment of the team, and so on and so forth, right? So for me, from the very beginning, it was like, hey, let's give the guy some time. I mean, he was in Copenhagen Flames before this. They were solid, but he never had to deal with the spotlight of being on a tier 1 team, an org as big as G2 with so many fans, having players on your team like Nico who are extremely good players, but also have, a mind of their own and have things that they want to do and their opinions and can be stubborn at times with those opinions. So those are all things you need to get used to. And I know in talking to HooXi, and even when he was our guest on the podcast, he was saying, that was so overwhelming for him at the beginning because, in Flames, he would try to reply to every single DM to people. He's like, right. And then it's just it's impossible, like when you join like a team like G2. So for me, it was always like, hey, the team has, Nico, it has Hunter on it, right? Monesi, like there's firepower on that team. They don't need another guy to frag. They need a guy who's going to maximize those other players on the team and then not be a liability where he is the reason they can't win games, So when you look at their games and some of the tournaments where they failed, for example, the Rio Major, they didn't even qualify. The Paris Major, they couldn't make it into the playoffs even. It was a bit of a collapse there as well. To cut the answer a little bit short, in a sense, for me, I don't think it's like HooXi is the problem in a sense of he's too bad of an individual player or he doesn't know how to call on a high level. I think the problem with him in particular was all the pressure, and he didn't really know how to handle it, and he was putting too much pressure on himself, and he was putting all the blame on himself when they would fail because of all this. You have Nico and you have this, and it's like Nico's last major and all this bullshit.
Sure.
First of all, Nico doesn't care about in that sense, for the and no one like was discussing that or putting that pressure on him or on anyone else on the team. I think G2 just at times has had the same problem of dealing with that pressure in some of the big games, whether it's as a team, whether it's individually. Nico in some big games until they won Katowice, and then we saw him pop off in Cologne, right? And Katowice and Cologne are two examples of when G2 is on point. I don't even necessarily want to say playing their A game, but just when they're not choking and that pressure isn't getting to them and they're not making like 1,000 of silly mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. They can be a really good team with those 5 players. Okay, they determined that JKS was the guy to replace, and from HooXi's interview and all of that stuff, it seems like it comes down to there's too many space takers on the team and not enough space creators, in a sense, which doesn't necessarily mean aggressive passive player, just guys who are going to sacrifice themselves so the other guy can make a play and get a kill. So we'll see if this change with Nexa, that's what it's supposed to do. But
right,
I think it's also, you have to look at like who else can you get, in a sense. Even
actually, this would be my spin. Let me spin it to this way, and we'll bring Maniac in afterwards. The other question would be this, Janko. Like, you've done sort of, like I said, you've done the more pragmatic approach there. Like, if you have one and you look at what they do have, essentially, they do have something to consolidate, something to keep, like, and build off. But my question would be this. The obvious angle would be, like, it's a fair question, but if someone says this isn't good enough, you pretty much always, if you say this isn't good enough, should have a solution or something that you can improve. Otherwise, you just tell the person the same problem you have, which is you don't know what to solve. So if the option was, Janko, they could have got, say, I'm purely speculating here, let's say like Snappi was available. Should they have done like that move, in your opinion? Is it not as obvious?
It's tricky because you need to look at you look also a bit longer term, right? I feel at some point in his career, Nico becomes an in-game leader, right? I don't know when that's going to happen. Shouldn't happen as long as he can play on a really high level. But he has the personality, and from the time that I've coached him, and he was an in-game leader in FaZe, he has really good instincts and he can do the job.
Right.
You obviously don't want him to do it. Now, I know they could have changed them for someone during the last summer break, right? And that could have been someone who, you're thinking, okay, this guy is an opportunity, but it would still be a risk, right? I guess at the end of the day, you've seen how good you can be. And it comes down to, do you think the things that are holding you back are fixable or not, right? And I think it came down to the G2 feels they're fixable, because the one thing they're lacking is consistency with that roster, and with HooXi at the helm. They win Cologne, they go to Gamers 8, where they're sort of, they kind of throw the game or let the game slip away from them against Vitality. If they beat Vitality there, they play Ents in another best-of-5 final, right after beating them in Cologne. You're thinking they're the favorites in that game. If they win 2 tournaments in a row, right, G2 with that extra confidence, who knows what happens from that point on. But, there's so many teams, histories that are filled with what ifs.
Yes.
So I think, not to go too long here, one other thing is obviously, is he a liability individually? Can you abuse him in the server and just beat G2 by targeting HooXi or finding these weak spots? And I think one of the things that we might be seeing on some maps like Mirage, B-site, it's your HooXi, it's your Kerrigan and stuff. I think you might be better off just putting the in-game leader in rotation always, right? Because he has to have a fight probably on his opponent's terms when he's the anchor. But if he's the rotation, he can use his all the preparation that you do and the game sense and everything you've done to put yourself in the right position or to support your better player who's actually the anchor, right? And also Kerrigan, for example, who can also be very inconsistent with his performances. One of the things he does a lot is just, like quote unquote stupid stuff, like just picks a timing, does a lot of timing plays, just walks through a smoke, runs through a smoke, right? And at that point, he catches you off guard. Doesn't matter if it's simple or if it's me on the other side, I'm going to be dead because he just timed me on the play. So maybe just utilizing that a little bit, because on T side, HooXi does a lot of sacrificing, right? He's rarely in positions where he needs, in clutches or anything like that. So it comes a little bit down to the CT side. So for me, I think it's all workable, right? It's just about mentally getting over some of those hurdles and playing with the sort of freedom that we've seen them display at World Finals and Katowice and Cologne.
I wanted to bounce back on a couple of points.
And fucking ban Vertigo. Sorry.
That's going to be on the list. You're talking about the positions and rotation. I think that's what Vitality did with Apex, right? They realized Apex could not be an anchor. They tried for a while. He played Ramp, he played B on Mirage. And then he himself said, fuck it, it's not going to work like that. Give me movement where I can actually have a couple of fights on my own terms. So that's a good example. We say we don't know what would happen if G2 won 2 tournaments in a row. Well, they did that in the beginning of the year. And we still saw them crash after that. It was World Finals, straight into Katowice. Was it 16 or whatever, 17 series in a row, one from G2. So they had this moment and they kind of let it go. The problem that I have, and this is very much hypotheses and from the outside suggestions, but when the confidence for HooXi towards himself and from the team towards him become an issue, actually, because there is such thing as being too selfless, putting yourself out there all the time, taking all the risks, being the meat shield in front of the attack. There comes a point where you need to have a certain degree of confidence in what you can do individually, not only so that you can play good, but also make the right decisions. I always go back to the same example. I've seen Apex and Vitality struggle individually, having horrible numbers, making terrible decisions. That was when Vitality was struggling. And you could just see he was out of oxygen. Like, he just didn't have the lucidity. The game was going too fast for him. He was making mistakes all around, and that was reflected in his game plan. So I do wonder to what extent it would be beneficial for G2 to set up HooXi just a little bit. Like, let's give him a couple of moments where he can feel comfortable, a couple of good kills. He gets into his own game, and then the calling is fine. I just think he has too many moments where you can feel like he's lost the light at the end of the tunnel. He just doesn't know anymore. He's basically become a pawn, and he's getting fragged left and right. And then the second, like the afterwave effect of that is, if I'm a player on G2 and I'm looking to my left and my right and I see HooXi, I'm thinking, bro, like, come on, like you gotta give me something. We have to have the idea that you're gonna get this frag when it comes to you. And then when that doubt starts creeping in, I think this is where things get a little uncomfortable, and this is where we start seeing G2 let the pressure get to them, overplay, overcompensate, force, because you have to have a certain degree of assurance and confidence that things are going to be all right, and that also means knowing your teammate are going to get your frag. So I think probably HooXi should try and set himself up just a little bit more, even though it sounds counterintuitive. When you have m0NESY and Nico, you think, hell, these two should be set up and that's it. I think they would benefit from putting him in a better, some of these positions at least, so he does not find himself in apoxia when he's playing.
I think some of these plays are like depending him and Nico who has the better spawn, for example, for banana control. So some of those stuff is the same, whether it's one player or the other, right? The utility that comes behind is the same and all that stuff. And we've seen him sometimes have good plays in that sense. One thing that also I think it's important is now the coming of Taz as well, and the change in the coaching department, because Swanee, they stuck with what they got when they had that initial success, and he's a great guy, and I'm sure he helped like with in-game stuff and this and that, but he is a sort of even just personality-wise, your assistant coach, your guy who's like can help you a lot with the X's and O's, but not really that head coaching figure with the sort of authority you need to have to run a team like that, and I feel like someone like Taz, who obviously we know is, not a shy guy or anything, incredibly experienced, very vocal, smart when it comes to the game too, has done it on a high level, dealt with that pressure. He's been in HooXi's shoes. literally, So I think that could prove to be a big help to HooXi in sort of how do you deal with these things, and just telling him, hey, don't worry about this, fuck this, this is your job, right? This is what you need to focus on, and don't let anything distract you for that. I'm looking forward to seeing, I think Taz can have a good amount of impact on this G2 lineup.
Yeah, what I would say is I actually probably am going to do like a solo video on my channel about this exact topic, because basically it might even be called something like, I don't know, something catch like the HooXi principle, because I actually think this is the best example I've ever seen. I've referenced this on a past episode, Maniac. It's the best example I've ever seen of a case where, like, objectively, obviously it does work. He has won championships. They've been in position to win championships many times over. But I sort of have, essentially, it's the idea of, can you maximize it further? Is there actually a better, essentially, is the enemy of the good in this scenario? If I reached for a better lineup and put Snappi in, would it make the team worse? Maybe actually HooXi having a lack of an ego allows those players to play awesome in their own way. You never know the dynamic. So essentially, what I might study is, I think it's the best example of one where even if you think he shouldn't be, it's probably borderline. It's a bit like, it's the IGL version of what I'm going to do, a similar video about Blame F, where I know loads of fans think he is just like, it's not a real star, he's just baiting and like killing eco fraggers. It's like, bro, there aren't that many eco frags in a game. Like, he's obviously just a really good player. You just don't like his fucking style of play. Like, you have to acknowledge he's a fucking, like, you can't put up the numbers. The point is, there aren't enough fucking people with a knife out in a random game of Counter-Strike for Blame F to put those numbers up, guys. And spoiler, if you watch him on CT side, how does he make the ecos all come to him? Do they just get magnetically drawn to him? No, he just holds his spot, and he's just a defensive player who does shoot everyone. So similarly, I have to give something to HooXi. It's one thing when he just won the last world. I was with kassad on that one, like, it's a banana cup, who gives a fuck? When you win Katowice, that gives me a little bit of pause. When you win Katowice and Cologne, I've got to at least give you fucking due. Like, you obviously have done something pretty good. Like, there's not many IGLs in history have done that, if people don't know. Yes, the majors are a massive black stain. You have to put that on there. Obviously, they've got to level that up. In fact, there's what I would say. If I had to say what I think a reasonable trajectory for HooXi and G2 is, it would be this. Okay, I'll say in the general circuit, you've done a good enough job, but you have to deliver at the major now. If you fail a major or two more, then that's the sort of trigger maybe I would use to say, let's try someone else. Let's bring someone else in. That feels fair, I think.
And also, like, it's not incidental that the major is where they failed. Why majors are the highest pressure environment that we have in Counter-Strike, right? So then, and that we heard it from them, that's where they choked, right? Like, it got to them. They were thinking too much about it. They were playing not to lose. They were playing scared too much. And, first it happened when they didn't qualify for Rio. They sort of had a talk about it. And that's after that, they got better. But I think just one interesting thing as well is, like, I had this question before too. So, for example, Duncan, would you rather have a team that can, go and win a tournament, but then also fail at a tournament, not get out of groups? Or would you rather have a team or be on a team where, like, you're always up there, like you're a contender, you're like in the playoffs, you're like semifinals, maybe finals sometimes, but you can never just really lift that trophy?
The problem is, I mean,
if
the
you were
obvious
GM, for example, what team would you rather have?
Well, the obvious example would be, would I rather have G2's lineup or Heroics? Because those are the two teams. Heroic won, like, the odd blast, but no one really cared. Like, the problem is, I'm pretty sure everyone would pick the one where you can win the Cologne and Katowice, right? Like, as much as in theory you're a better team to be consistent, like, you want to actually have, like, essentially the one thing I'll give HooXi is this: when it all came together, there's a reason his team won the tournament. Now, people might be cynical and go, they just fragged out. By the way, even that's unfair, because I will say, Janko, one thing that triggers me in sports like the NFL or the NBA is when people see, like, really great players, like they do this to Phil Jackson. They just go, yeah, but that's just because he had, like, Kobe and Shaq. It's like, mate, there's other people that had these players that didn't win. Just having the best player doesn't, there's no real, like, you do know that is a meme, like Nico go kill. Like, that's not actually like a strat. By the way, I will say though, there's one thing I will shade in. That's one reason I do reserve a little bit of skepticism always, even when they win, about HooXi, which is one thing I don't think people actually give Nico credit for, is, dude, as a rifler, Nico's almost like the divisive rifling, where if people know, I think they get the sense now that they took apart Astralis, he wasn't just an AWPer in Astralis. He was almost like an IGL AWPer. Like, he would kind of call his own play, as it were, call the other opponent AWPer's play, and then move himself. And then it's almost like Glaive didn't have to worry about that. He just had to integrate with him. Like, to me, Nico does that as well. Like, guys, if you didn't notice, remember when he was in FaZe? Nico was like probably the best lurker in the world. He just won fucking entry of the year at the HLTV Awards. Like he's actually completely revolutionized his game to me. So I also will say, of all the other players, if you look at all the other great riflers, no rifler, like there's other riflers can bring as much in the server with the crosshair. No one's bringing as much to the team component as Nico though. So he does have a massive, like sort of like fucking ace up his sleeve in that regard that the other IGLs doesn't have. Like if I'm comparing him to Snappi and Ents, there's no fucking, like if Nerds might be a banger fucking rifler, he isn't fucking Nico, mate. Like you get an extra component. Because I agree with you, Janko. Even though I was actually more skeptical when he was in FaZe, I think now it seems like actually even temperament wise, it would feel more appropriate for Nico to be more of an IGL now. It feels like he's settled into that role and he sort of has figured out the balance of when to be a star and call his own play, as it were, and when to be actually sacrificial and help the team, right? He's actually got quite a fine balance, I feel like now.
Do we wait at least five years for Nico to be an IGL? Do we wait at least that? You know, other players have done it. Like, come on, like Electronics done it. Like, you know, they've tried. It hadn't worked out.
Sure.
I'm okay for Nico IGL. I just want at the very least 3 years.
No, I'm with you. I just agree, Janko. I could see it coming on the horizon. Like once his individual it's just an obvious move. I feel like, yeah,
he's matured a lot, 100%. I mean, and I talk about this with him, and I'm really proud of that because, you know, you look at the player cams nowadays, it's completely different compared to 3 years ago, right? And having that realization that every little thing matters and how you react to things matters, especially if you're Nico, you know, and you have someone like Monesi sitting next to you in his rookie year or whatever it is, or someone like HooXi, right, who's in his first like tier 1 team and has watched you play and wreck people all this time, and now he's supposed to tell you what to do. It can be pretty intimidating, man. Even though all this bullshit about Nico, you haven't heard a single person who played with him that said anything about him as a teammate except he does whatever it's necessary to help the team win. That's all you hear about anyone. No one says a single bad thing about him being like a diva or having all control or making all decisions. Nothing like that. It's just like the guy just wants to do whatever it takes to win, you know? So I think absolutely he's now grown, his temperament got a little bit better. But I've always said also for in-game leaders, man, like for example, when people ask me about Fallen or even Neo falls in the same category, I said like, yeah, Fallen has one flaw as a leader. It's like he's too nice of a guy. You know, like you have to be a bit of a dick. The same as a star player, same as a captain. You have to have a bit of an ego and be hey, you know, we're doing this. Like it's okay to hear other people when they have an idea. Obviously, you want that, and when someone feels like they have a good call, but ultimately it's your call.
Yes.
If there's something that you want to do and you're sure about, it doesn't matter what anyone else has told you. You should go ahead with your own call, right? And also, I think something with Nico as well when we talk about temperament and the way you speak is like when he makes a call that even for me, you know, I'm like standing behind. I might want to take a timeout and change this call. It's a bit ballsy. It's a bit, you know, but I might be right, I might be wrong. But the way he said it, I look at the other guys on the team, they're fucking laser focused, you know? Like they believe it 100%. I'm like, listen, I've seen 1,000 times a bad call, but executed with conviction can win you around more so than a good call that's like not really executed properly or that people second guess, especially if you take a timeout to overcall your player, right? Like other players usually don't like that just in general. So, you know, and that's paid off more often than it hasn't. And I think that's also important. And I have absolutely witnessed firsthand Fallen when he was in that zone. Like it was amazing to watch. Like it was like he had wall hack. He would tell you exactly, he would go somewhere with the op. He'll say, I'm going to kill this guy here. Then you're going to throw these nades and you two are going to walk out. There's not going to be anyone there and just like whatever. And the timeout is over. The round starts. And that exactly happens and we win the round. I'm like, this guy's a fucking magician. But that's like what makes great players great. When they're in that, when they hit that flow state, it's like they can see everything.
I also think like the example of Fallen is a pretty good one because you can imagine both ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is when he was winning and confident with the Brazilian mix. You would imagine he would have the flexibility to take in like calls and ideas from his players, but also he would know when to actually hit the fist on the table and say, listen, this is what we're doing. And you've seen the opposite of that spectrum, which is no confidence, being eaten alive by teammate in Liquid. And then you actually give way too much space to people because you don't really know at what point do you have to sort of shorten the leash. And this is where we go back to the amount of self-confidence that a leader has, because
Yes.
there have to be moments as a leader where your star player or someone else on the team is going to come up with a call that you don't agree with. And the scoreline is 10-10, 11-11, and you have to make a decision. And you have to live with that decision. If you short stop your player and you tell him, no, listen, this is what we're doing, you take the risk of antagonizing him and frustrating him for the rest of the game. And if you allow that player to make the call, you think it's wrong, and then you lose, you're automatically going to start spinning in your own head, thinking, why did I let this B execute go? I knew this was a bad idea. And I think to find this flexibility relies on a really strong core of self-confidence where you know, okay, like this is how we're going to play together. I'm going to leave you a bit of leeway. We're all going to make mistakes and it's going to be fine. But I do think it's a very dangerous game. Not everybody can do that without suffering from the consequences at any point.
I think ideally that happens as least as possible, right? Because you're supposed to be on the same page from how you view the game and what you do in practice and stuff. Like when it's a certain situation, you both should think that the solution should be the same for both of you guys. And sure, that can't be, that's not going to be the case early on in teams' tenures and whatnot. But that's one of those things that you start from the ground when you build your game and build your system or whatever, and think about, okay, in certain scenarios, there's just certain plays or calls you believe work against what your opponent is doing. So that's better to happen when you think the player doesn't see something because he was too immersed in the game and playing, right? And you feel like you being outside of the game. It's like his call is good for the situation that he thinks he's seeing, but maybe you disagree with what the situation is, right? And then that's the discussion is about. It's like not what the call should be against what your opponents are doing, is like what your opponents are actually doing. Because
I'll give you an example. I've got a good segue for you. One of the reasons why, if people wonder why, I've actually said it in all the videos, but people forget this detail. One of the reasons I've always doubled down on the idea I actually think Alexi B seems to be like a pretty good in-game leader is because I always tell people, not just from that blast, but obviously from Flashpoint, I could literally hear his comms. I've heard him comm the game and actually call a real live official game. And so, because I've probably heard something, I don't know, 10 games or something he called, maybe more than that, I've actually been able to hear these exact discussions. And what's amazing is that was what actually showed me. It's actually what you're talking about, this exact scenario. Because what showed me he was a good in-game leader was, first of all, most of his calls were coherent and clearly had a perspective to them. But then it's that what was ruining him in this team, if people remember, this was the team that had both NBK, who always wanted to be an in-game leader, and it had Valdean, who'd been an in-game leader. And the problem was, in their team, because they were an international team, their whole thing was sort of a lot of comms. It's like everyone talks a lot, and it's I guess that's the way they make people feel confident part of the team, we all contribute. But the problem was in freeze time, basically, there'd be times when Alexi B's making what's not only a good call, but if you're an IGL, you can see he's was conditioning the opponent. In the last 3 calls were to set up for this is I've got the rotate guy, basically. And the problem was, you're saying, Janko, in isolation, someone like Valde on a different part of the map would have seen something and be no, we can actually hit long here now. And it's in isolation, he might even be right through. That might even be a good call, but he doesn't know. He's not only short circuiting Alexi B, he's fucking up the whole game plan. But in that moment, like you say, that's why you've got to nail this shit in practice. There's not time in the time out to go well, here's why we wouldn't do that, because on the next, there's no time in that. It's basically shut up. You have to do what I say. I'm sorry, on this one round, I've got to overcall you, basically, because I agree. In that scenario, I feel like a casual fan will think everyone should always have a voice, and it should be a democracy. Sometimes it has to be a dictatorship as an IGL, right? Especially if you have you're a good IGL, you have to give him a chance to let him cook, as they say.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also have what Cadian said in one interview, everyone has an idea when we're up 14-6
yes.
or something that they want to call. But let me see you say something when it's 14-14, motherfucker. If you don't want to do it then shut your fucking mouth, which is a really good point. You can't just, I'm feeling now I want to do a little bit of calling now. I woke up on the right side of the bed, I'm going to come in with a bunch of ideas. Low key, I realized that one of the first tournaments we were in as FaZe, I think, and we were losing some game, and I'm what the fuck is going on? This T side never felt like this. I think it was Inferno. And then I see some practice and rewatch the game, and I'm yeah, because in practice we have, I don't know, apps control at 135, and we have bracket control in 130, and here my guy is on bridge at 125 still.
Right.
So I'm hey guys, listen, doesn't matter, it's 13-13 or whatever it is. We need to be aggressive. We need to get map. I don't care if you die. We have no information. We take control too late. we don't bait out nades, and we just get blocked late on. So it's like stuff like that where players, you need to, like, even starting from practice, be aware of how things are going to go, like in games, right? And play for that, play for some of those scenarios. Obviously, you're not always going to be prepared for everything. Like sometimes you're going to have to improvise during the game and whatnot, but you don't want shit like that to be happening where, we play a T side, even now, 12 rounds, let's say, and then the in-game leader calls like 4 rounds, and the other 3 gun rounds are some of the other players. And then it comes to a game and he has to do 8, and he's not even like used to that dynamic, so to speak. He's like, wait, shit, what? You know, I usually, you know, I don't run out of rounds.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about, let me think, what would be another good one? Oh, I'll tell you what, a fun one to talk about would obviously be the Heroic team, because it's quite an out there roster, right? I don't think a lot of people know what to make of it. So first of all, obviously the problem is, just because of the rumor mill, people thought that Heroic was getting the 3 players from Ensign, that it was just going to be all good, and, you know, Saw moves over with his boys, minus Snappi, basically. And then it's sort of like, actually, the joke is, if you could have had that team and Kixon, you actually already would be back in a good position. Maybe you'd be shooting, you know, firing on all cylinders, whereas instead you've ended up with this weird roster where you've got Kixon. Okay, so he made the big signing. By the way, behind the scenes, I've heard actually among players, he does have something of like a HooXi type hype. People think he is a good in-game leader behind the scenes, and like he's like sort of proven himself. So fair play, there's some player hype, that's a good sign. And then obviously you have got Nerds, top 20 player in HLTV, was like one of the revelations of 2023, at times looks really good. But the problem is, beyond that, like the joke is, after that I would skip to the coach minute. You've got Saw, it's like, because beyond that, what have you got? Like, yeah, okay, you kept Shush and Tessus, that's pretty good, but like they weren't like the big names. You've got kind of a weird roster for me. Like I like, my initial feeling is the sort of in no man's land. Like I feel like you'll just sort of be floating around and you just won't be relevant. That's my sense. Are you having a stronger feeling on this, Dank? Are you thinking they're going to be actually a top team? Can they do it with this core?
No. I feel like they have a core in HooXi, Nerds, and Saw. And then they're hoping that one of Shush or Tessus proves themselves enough so that they don't have to change both, which my money is on Shush out of those 2. And then,
as in which one they should change, you mean?
No,
the one that's stable.
The one that key, you keep Shush.
Yeah,
right, okay.
I thought Tessus was one of those guys who would drop off in some of the big
streaky as
games.
fucking, yeah.
Yeah, like pressure would get to him, you know, and that kind of a thing.
Right.
But we'll see. And Nikodos, if somehow he proves himself, but he's had a couple of opportunities by now, didn't really pan out. And especially if, you know, I heard the same things about Kixon, and then you add Nerds there and stuff. Those guys deserve someone better than Nico does, you know, like in that sense. And then you would have a really good team. The 5th player, you know, you could see who you could round it up with after the major. I think it's another one of those teams where we'll see. I mean, bro, even the close qualifier for the RMR is, you know, stacked. A lot of teams will go through to the RMR from the close qualifier. But for example, once we get there, I'm not sure Heroic makes it to the major, like that they will get out of the RMR. Obviously, long ways away, not know about the teams, but I wouldn't put my money on them to make it that far. But obviously thinking long term for the org, you know, going international, for going full Danish, I think they did a good job of, sure, your main guys are in-game leader and Opper, but they got an in-game leader and a star rifler and a really good coach. So that's good enough in my book when it comes to team building and knowing that, you know, at the time with the major looming and the first CS2 major, it's not like you could have gotten an Opper and bought them out as easily. Sure. I heard the same thing, that they were trying to get the end score. Guess Falcons outbid or whatever, not surprised by that. And, you know, it is what it is. But, yeah, definitely 2 more player changes before they make me excited.
I think the saddest part of it is how much of a pit stop it will represent for Nerds. I think Nerds didn't have to go through that anymore. I think he'd already had his sort of takeoff. Like, that was it. I mean, he's rookie of the year. He's obviously a very interesting player to follow. I don't think he needed, or I would have wished he didn't have to kind of live through some of these months to come, because I agree, this team is not going to be a top 10 team. You do have a couple of pieces and elements that you would want to hold on to. If Kixon ends up being a Shui, like one of the great leaders of the years to come, great. Maybe you've made a good operation here. Nerds, obviously fantastic signing, so he showcased what he could do in ends. Shush as a reliable piece, I'm ready to buy it. but that's about it. Tesis and Nikodos, as far as I'm concerned, I'm kind of sort of over it. I wouldn't really give it too much time at the very, very top. So yeah, it's annoying because it means for nerds and I'm looking at it on a very individualistic level. For nerds, it means I'm going to have to wait a little longer. I'm going to have to wait whatever next team is going to be in order for him to perform. But the problem is, if we're tracking nerds and his progress and where he can ends up in top Counter-Strike, who then joins Heroic? That is going to be a great improvement. Who would want to join Heroic? What are the arguments? Yeah, sure, Kixon is an argument, and then nerds and so on. That's it. But there are teams above that would have been or will be then much more interesting. And if I was a top player, I would have to consider it. And you just imagine if nerds had followed the core events with Magisk, then like holy hell, he would have been straight lined up into a team that would defend or would have I guess a candidacy for playoffs run here and there. So I'm personally frustrated for nerds. For Kixon, I think it's all right because I know a whole lot of people on the hype train. I'm a little bit more moderate. I do think I don't want to jump the gun. I think he's done fairly good with the pieces he had. I still want to see, and I think this could be a pretty decent position for him to prove. Like with a team that is far from being perfect, he could still get some results. He could still overperform with the team. And then if he does that, then like his case becomes 10 times stronger. If he actually gets decent result with this Heroic, then the value of Kixon will immediately go through the roof, which would be great for him. But yeah, I'm a little bit frustrated. Honestly, this roster is not exactly what I wanted it to be, at least for nerds, because I value him greatly.
And they probably need to shell out a little bit when they do bring players, because I was thinking like they need to find a diamond in the rough. But, nerds just won Rookie of the Year, right? So it's not like he's some super experienced veteran. Okay,
Sure,
he's not a rookie anymore. Kixon as well, like on a proper tier 1 team. Like Apex are just outside of that. I think it's fair to say they were a tier 2 team. They probably punched above their weight a little bit. That's why he got a spot on Heroic. But you probably want to bring some experienced rifle. That's why some Pius would have been great. Like someone who can also help a little bit, maybe as a secondary caller, right? Something like that. I wanted to say that if they can't get anyone like that, they should maybe try and get Regali from OG, but he's also a super young and not really experienced player. So then you're in the danger of, right, like that being something that hurts you. But I don't know, this Heroic team doesn't do anything for me. On the other side, the Astralis team, paying big bucks to get Stone and Yabi. Arguably they have 4 of the best players in Denmark.
Yeah, I tell you what, we'll pivot to that next because I'll put
they have the best, and they have the best CEO in the game.
Yeah. Well,
Duncan.
So he is back. I will say, you know what's sad, by the way, before we get into that, I will just say, I won't even lie. In a world, what you have to ask or remember always is the greater evil question. Because I'll tell you what, obviously, once upon a time, Nikola Noiha was the big bad, as they say in American TV terminology. He was like the main villain, right, of By the Numbers, obviously, most iconically. And in some ways, we built him up as like some super evil mastermind. I'll tell you what, in a way, that is annoying because you think, oh, what a bastard. But that's actually way better than just like some faceless country buys into a game or like some giant corp. Like, that's not a good bad guy. That's just fucking faceless, isn't it? Like, in some ways, I at least like the wrestling angle. That's like a character. Like, when I saw that tweet, I was also sort of like, oh shit, he's back. He's back. He's back. Like, of course, like, it was hype. I can't lie. I almost made a comment, but I withheld it for the time being. We'll put a pin in that because I have one last thing to say about the Heroic one, which goes like this. I actually think Janko's nailed it. One of the reasons I'm really not in on this lineup, because actually when you look at the lineup on paper, it's not terrible. Like, considering they look like they were taking some really dodgy makeshift lineups to these blasts. Like, obviously it's way better than that. There's at least something there. But actually I'll start with that point Janko made about nerds. Dude, this is where people have got to stop looking at fucking HLTV rating. Because when Nerds has a big tournament, the HLTV rating tells you he's the next Nico level rifler. He isn't. He's in his first year as a pro, guys. Like, we are actually taking what he did at ENCE, where he was the younger one with a mega veteran IGL as well, by the way, like a coach and IGL who scouted him, and then they had that core existing before him. Like, that's a really good situation for a rookie. We're now in this team acting like he's the one who's going to do like Nico numbers and be taken care of, and then we're going to worry about the rest. It's like, whoa. We can't take for granted that he's going to do that in this squad. We don't even yet know how is he going to like interact with Kixon. Like, is that going to be a good synergy? Do they get each other? So I already think people are jumping the gun on that one. On the Nikados one, unfortunately, he just never made it after Copenhagen Flames. It's funny because if everyone remembers when Copenhagen Flames made those major runs, the actual players that were hyped was fucking Roy and Nikados. It was never Yabi. Yabi was sort of just in the middle of the pack. And obviously, actually, of the three, he looks like the best player so far, even though, yes, he had a bit of a dip at the end when they all went to shit in Heroic. And then the last thing I would say is, let me think how to phrase it this way. The problem I have with the Kixon move as well is this. We've obviously only seen him in that Apex team. They had the one major run, then yes, admittedly, because they lost GL, they had to reset a little bit, and then they were like, okay, aside from that. My problem is people are forgetting that team used to be coached by Cuban, who obviously now coaches Ents. And as far as I know, he was one of those coaches who was allowed like saying the players they picked up. And as far as I know, like GL was his boy, for example, and he picked him up and put him. So the problem there is I want to see Kixon without someone else setting the team. I want to see him, like, by the way, if he can do something with this squad, he probably is amazing. Like, I think the squad's pretty ropey. Like, I actually don't see why would this be a top 10 team? I don't think it would be. I don't even know really what the hope is. Like, as far as I can tell, this is almost like a stopgap roster. Like, you almost have to hope it's like, right, what I'm really hoping, like you say, Janko, is I'm really just hoping Kixon and Nerds really prove themselves. And then around the major, if people don't know that, coincidentally is when actually a bunch of contracts come up, then I just sign whoever I need to. Do I really need to buy the big AWPer? Do I need another big rifle? That's when I'll figure out what I need. But I don't think even Heroic believe, since they didn't get some pious, this is the lineup. Come on, Maniac.
No, I agree. I just wanted to say on the Nerds point, I'm with you on we should be careful what kind of acronyms we give him right now. My fear is that he could actually just as quickly we put him high up on the pedestal, he could disappear very quickly. That's my fear. Because I personally value a lot. Like the eye test, when I see him play, I think he's an incredible player, and I would bet, on his future in the game. But the truth is, I don't know if he's ready right now to be the champion carrying a team that is unbalanced, a little bit unstable. But because if he starts underperforming, people are going to be relatively quickly to put him back under the rug. And that's going to be it. And this is why I fear for him, because I do think there are risks. There are real risks. If this Heroic project is to crash, and by crash, I mean miss out on the very good competitions, miss out on the group stage of Katowice, of Cologne, all of these, like the major cycle and all. If they disappear, Nerds will have an expiration date on for how long do we hold on to the idea that he's going to be the next big thing and he could become an incredible rifle. There's going to be an expiration date that's going to go real fast. So this is the worry that I have. I don't know if he is quite ready now, because the flip side of this argument is if he continues to be so strong and he pushes Heroic through the finish line, then oh my God, that's it. Yeah. Like he's put all doubts to bed. Yes. But that's a huge if. And I don't want to say it's a coin flip, because obviously he's got his fate in his own hands, but wow, it's a Damocles sword that he's got above him right now.
Oh, and one last thing to say, because obviously we'll switch to the Astralis stuff, but on the players that stayed, right, here's what's funny is I actually made this point that I can't remember who else made the point. Maybe it was like Maui Snake or someone on Twitter. I actually did think the funny thing about the Astralis movies, that is just like a fan would do. They just stacked all the names, whereas like the joke is, if you're actually looking for roles, I'm amazed Astralis didn't take one of Shush and fucking Tessa's. Like, I agree with the Shush angle, by the way. Of the two players, the difference is Shush just really looks like, I mean, it's why his name's appropriate. He's just like a sleeper. He's just like a really smart player who seems to be actually have like a very good sense of his own game and fills in all the fucking holes in the team. He's just a really solid player. Meanwhile, the problem with Tessus is this. I actually do like him as a player, and I think his aim is very good, but I will say this right now. I think he is a player that you will see was to some degree a product of Cadian's system. As in, I think he got to look amazing when they would make those like snap mid-round calls on T-side, all rush a site together, and then he had total confidence in the call and everyone backing him up. That's probably the number one team of the last few years where everyone backs you up on the call. And if you're the entry, dream scenario. They all come in, you make the space, they take the space, they follow you in, they go to the side. In this team, I don't know what it's going to be like. I have no idea if it's going to be anything comparable to Cadian's approach. So if you just, like, the point I'm making is Tessus isn't Yekindar. He isn't just some, like, monster guy, like, he'll figure it out. Like, I don't know. I've only seen him be amazing in that one team, and even then, he was pretty streaky, like Janko said. So, yeah, I have my questions. So if we flip to the Astralis side, Janko, the obvious question is this, like I set it up, is the problem you have is on paper, it looks like you've just said to some 8-year-old Danish fan, make a team out of your favourite Danish players, and he's done it. He's put all these massive names on. But the question obviously becomes, which is why it's a good topic for talk shows, is how do you make all these players work? How do you make them all work at once, Janko? It seems like a pretty tricky puzzle to me. You think so?
So and so. I think there are some minor concessions that players will need to make to make it all work, but I don't think there's any really gigantic role clashes, right? Like, for example, like that Astralis team had when they had Blame, Config, and Glaive on the same team, right? Like 3 guys who play rotator roles, and Glaive had to play anchor. He's terrible at that. That probably really hurt Glaive's career just in general, because not only was the team not playing well, he was really, really poor individually, playing out of position. So I predict, something like where Blame, Device, and Stare play in the group, right? Or maybe Stone, depending on how they set it up. Yabi is on the side anyway, and then you have Stone or Stare or Blame on the other side, depending. Like, if I don't think Blame can really call in this team from the lurk, he has to call from the group. So in that sense, I think there's ways to get it done. Some CT side positions probably working around, but as long as it's not too egregious, like you're not moving players from rotation to anchor, just maybe, you played connector, now you're going to play cat, right? Like, I think nowadays Counter-Strike, even on the CT side, is so much team-oriented, where it's not really up to you. You know how to hold this like one spot. You have to hold this one position, this one area of the map, this one pathway. All of it is, hey, are we fighting for mid? Okay, then we're getting there. Someone's flashing over. We're all swinging together. Are we giving it, playing more passive angles? What does that mean for the round? This other side has to react, and so on and so forth. So I think for me, it's probably one of the teams that I'm most excited about for this year. Them and Liquid are at the top of my list, and then after that, low key is a kind of obviously Spirit too, because of Shiro and Donk on the same team, right? So those are some of the newly formed teams that I think would be really interesting. I think both Liquid and Astralis can be contenders. I think actually both of those teams can surpass definitely Mao's, probably FaZe, and potentially even G2, depending on how these G2 lineup goes, and be the 2 teams that will challenge Vitality the most, because I think Vitality is number 1, and then there's like 2 or 3 spots empty, and then all these other teams come along.
Ooh, okay, bold there, Maniac. Where are you commenting on this lineup?
Well, I like the hype for Janko when it comes to Astralis. You were talking about roles. The only sort of red flag that I have intuitively in my mind is, how is Stone going to deal with the fact that in the pecking order of who gets the resources on the CD side, he's now going to be number 3, where it was never the case for him.
Yes.
But now he is going to be, just by the state of the team. You have Device, which obviously you're going to dedicate resources and moves and liberties, and you have BlameF, and what BlameF wants, BlameF gets. And I don't think it's a problem, because I do think his output is incredible, and he should have the positions where he gets to be, for my money, one of the best CT-sided player we have in the entire game. That's how I see BlameF. But that means that you're hoping for relatively similar performance from Stone as we know him. I was looking at the Asia TV ranking. Was it like 9th or top 10 in the world? He finished again 9th, exactly 9th best player in the world in 2023. And this guy is going to be number 3 in the pecking order of who gets the CT positions and who get the freedom. So that, to me in itself, it's a big assumption to say, great, we're going to get the Stone that we had in a Heroic. We're going to get the superstar, super well-rounded Stone who's going to do good on that.
Well,
that's
You're hoping to get better Stone than Heroic. I think this is the team, the lineup that will define Stone, right? Because you can go about it 2 ways, about a lot of players from that Heroic team, right? Did the team make them look better than they are? Or did maybe that whole team game
hold them back
a little bit? Yeah, hold them back a little bit, And it seemed from how everything unfolded that ultimately Stone probably felt that he was being held back a little bit, which I don't know. From the outside in some of those big games, bro, seemed like you're just choked.
Yeah, exactly.
And didn't do a good job, right? And your stock was going down. So if obviously he doesn't feel the same way, this is the lineup to prove it, right?
Yes.
And from the moment you join the team and whatever bothered you in Heroic, you want to make sure that doesn't happen in Astralis, right? But now is the time you fucking prove to us you are a top 10 player or whatever, or you will go down like being just a player who was good in that Cadian system and isn't a big game player, or maybe isn't just good enough to perform on that high of a level. And that's why absolutely for me, it's like Device and Blame are 1 and 2 in that team. They're also the 2 best players in my eyes.
I was going to say, if Stone actually turns into a top 10 player in Astralis is going to win trophies or make deep runs to semifinals at the very least. What team has 3 top 10 players in the world and doesn't win, outside from Cloud9 last year? And even then. So it's a huge assumption. And if it turns out it works, holy shit, like Stone, Device, BlameF is a trio strong enough to go and play in Lanxess, playing Spodek, and be there in the semis and the grand final. I mean, we have a super small sample size. I haven't really kept my eye too much on Astralis right now. I just feel like the numbers are pretty low for both Stone and Yabi, but I personally don't give two shits about it right now. I'm waiting to see RMRs. I'm waiting to see these kind of moments.
Who the fuck is going to be their coach?
Is that even announced?
No, I don't think so. I don't believe there's anything come out yet.
I can check live.
So it's
roster.
It's not announced, but you guys know is basically what you're saying. But now we're recording, so you can't tell me. So we have to wait.
Oh no, I don't. I'll say I don't know who the coach is going to be. I'm not actually aware.
I also don't know.
I don't have any secret info on that.
That's the one part as far as done. They had to have registered one for Blast, so they're not going to.
So what you're telling me is I should know.
No, but I mean, if you don't know,
maybe they don't have one. Then
they don't have one because I mean, it would have leaked if someone was registered. Yeah. It would have leaked. I
think so. By the way, here's an angle I would take on this. I'll pick up what Maniac was saying there. I actually do think that's an angle. Like, if obviously we're accepting a lot of, if purely we're in the hypothetical here, we're trying to get inside people's minds. So obviously we're speculating, guys. Like, I don't know the behind the scenes. I'm not friends with Stout. I haven't got like some secret info line. But if we put ourselves in the perspective you were talking about, right? That actually is a plausible reason for him to, one, want Cadian removed or to leave Heroic. If he feels, because think about this, right? The way it used to go, even though I personally was quite critical of Cadian himself for some of those inabilities to win tournaments and the fact that they always broke down, I think sometimes he did rely too much on his calling. Or it's actually what Kyrigan used to do back in the day. He used to really think every round he can make the genius call. It's like sometimes you have to just have like a basic structure to it and just play off that, let the players make the calls, you know. Otherwise, you'll live with the calls, but you'll die with them too. And one of the problems is, I don't think fans did what I did though, because Cadian was such a fan favourite. I actually think fans were all sort of like, right, it's okay for you, Cadian, you tried your hardest, and the main person they went in on was Down, because famously he has the red plate, he chokes, doesn't he? So I think everyone did blame Down. I'm sure he felt blamed as well. So in my opinion, if he then thinks like either one, maybe I could play differently with a different IGL, like maybe I just want to play normal standard 5v5 CS, maybe that's what you want. And then two, if you're going to go elsewhere, maybe his whole thing, because he could do this angle too, is if I'm Stown, I could also say I was the best player in this team. Like, first of all, the numbers prove it. And then secondly, look at my game. I'm just better than the rest of you. Like, maybe I want to go and play with a bunch. Maybe I want to play in a superstar team where it's not all on me. It's not everyone like, did I fail? Maybe I just want to be another one of the guys with Device and BlameF. Let's all just frag out a win. Because I'll say this part is, like, I can't know how Yabi will do because I can't know how much of that was being in the Heroic team, the boost up. I didn't think he was that great in Copenhagen Flames. But if you have a team with BlameF, Stown and Device, unless you seriously fuck it up or have massive personality problems, it feels impossible that the floor of that team can't be pretty high. Like, the difference is when I said Heroic shouldn't be a top, you should at minimum be a top 10 team with this lineup. Like, mate, think of the power you have there with those three players. That's crazy. Like, as long as they even vaguely fit. Like, we already know Device and BlameF will look great together. If Stout even vaguely fits in this team, like we're saying, you can have three top 20 players immediately right out of the gate. Obviously, then the angle becomes how will the IGL, will they get a coach change and stuff. There's still factors to play in, but yeah, I think that part's actually like underrated. And then I'll just throw this in there, which is, I also think if you're in a team like this, it should literally achieve what I'm speculating might be one of Stown's reasons. It should immediately take that pressure off you. Even though I agree, we're going to judge him heavily on whether he succeeds or fails in this team. If you're Stown though, if you can look down the line and you do see fucking Device, mate, I'm pretty confident we're going to win this game. That guy's awesome. He's still really good now. And I'll give one last detail, because I actually think you've nailed it, Maniac. I think fans would get this totally wrong. To a fan, they might think, well, Astralis hasn't done anything for the last few years, but Stown's just coming as the star player of Heroic. He must walk in and get everything. No, I'll tell you a very quick anecdote from sports that will explain this to you guys. There was a Lakers team back in I think it was the one in 2013, the one where they signed Dwight Howard, who at the time was like considered the best center in the league, and they just swapped the second best center, Andrew Bynum, for him in like some crazy trade. And they ended up with a team where, because he was coming in, a lot of people thought, right, well, what they'll do now is, this will be like when it was Kobe and Shaq, it'll be like, right, they'll make like a two-man dynamic duo and they'll run the league. And supposedly what happened, Janko, is Kobe just said to Dwight Howard after he'd signed, like, yeah, by the way, you're like third in line. It goes like me, Pau Gasol, and then you get yours after that. And Dwight Howard was sort of like, what the fuck? Why have I joined this team then? Like, I walked in to be like a star player. But what they don't get is that's because Kobe Bryant with Garrett just won a bunch of championships, and his logic was it's the other way around. It's like, mate, you're joining me to win championships. Like I already know what I'm doing. I've got my game sorted, so don't fuck with my game. I'm going to do my game, and then you can fit like whatever's left over. So even though I've made it mad egotistical, like it was Kobe Bryant, I don't think Device would phrase it that way. But if you guys think that team is anything other than the way Device wants it, it better be. By the way, they'd be stupid not to do it. Like if you're Device and Blamer, if you can call your shot right now, I think it'd be totally legitimate to do. And they could even turn us down and say, but you had your problems in Heroic, mate. Maybe we can reposition you. We can find you a spot where you don't have that pressure, but you can still perform. So the problem with this one is I can see why Janko's hyped. I know why Sponge was hyped as well. I know everyone's laughing at Sponge in that Reddit thread. Here's what you guys are missing. I don't know how you fix this. I don't know how you make it work. I don't know how they'll play. I don't know how they'll be IGL. I don't know how they'll be cut. There's so many question marks. But I'll tell you what, if you can solve this puzzle, it'd be fucking sick. Like, this might be one of the highest firepower team ever. This like the actual potential is crazy for this. It's exciting, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I also think Stair was probably misregarded just a little bit.
Course.
I don't buy into he's going to be the next incredible player. No, I don't think that's how we should look at it. I think we should look at it as a very versatile and competent player that can fill also roles here and there. And this is why a lot of people were looking at the previous roster and they were saying, maybe Buzz and Bort make more sense. I've seen how Stair plays, and I think he's way more versatile than the rest. I think he can fill in more, because when you have three players who are so very top heavy, the way we're talking about Stone, Blame, and Device, what you need from the other two is to be able to kind of fill the gap. You need them to fill the gap and do it to a good level. And I think Stair does that better than to be a superstar. I think whenever he was put up in a position to be a superstar, he under-delivered. But if he's going to be my number 4 and he's going to be the guy that picks up the slack in there, I think he's going to do fine. I think he's going to do just great. So, yes, firepower, there's a lot to talk about in Astralis.
Okay, so what you're saying is you don't need him to take the next step on the stair, and you also don't just want him to be disregarded and have a load of blank stares. So listen, I'm here till Tuesday. This is what you've missed on the desk, boys. You've all just been doing analysis of the game. Where's all the shit puns and boom?
I can't wait for 2025 for someone to hire you, Duncan. Maybe we can get to do an event together.
Might happen. Not impossible. Not impossible. All I'll say on that
for Santa for next year.
By the way, when I said that on Twitter, I'm not actually implying I've got like some gigs lined up. The difference is I never even tried in the past years. Like one of the things actually people like Janko
so just like DDK.
No, a little bit like that. Well, the joke there is, I don't know how much can be said publicly, but since I'm not friends with him anymore, I'll just say this. As far as I know, DDK just get permanently wrecked by Riot Games in Valorant, if you wonder why he's just got wrecked. So that's not my situation. I've never been in the Riot Games space. What I will say is this, though. I just meant that actually I'm open to doing it now. And there's a couple of TOs I might even reach out to and see if I would work smaller event or medium event, if it's just a cool one I want to do. If people don't know, I've always said this. I've had a very blessed career. I've actually never had to be the one hustling as an analyst because I was always doing it as my side gig. Like, I've told people the story before. I think 3 times ever, Janko, I've ever emailed the TO and said, like, am I working this next event? Aside from that, I would just wait. If they ask me, then I say yes. And if they don't ask me, I'd go, okay, cool. You picked someone else. There's no problem. I actually had a very fucking, people might find it strange. I'm actually very grateful for my career. I thought it was pretty epic. I wasn't a pro player. I got to do like a bazillion events. So it's more just like, I obviously can't work with the SL. That one's not on the table. But there's other ones where if it was the odd event and it was the right circumstances, I would do it. And don't worry though, I'm being all humble now. But absolutely, if I come back, it'll be like when I came back and did that major and I told you all on Twitter, like, fucking prepare because I'm going to destroy everyone. Like, oh, if I come back, I'll do it properly. Like I say, I'll do the, like, if Undertaker comes back for WrestleMania, you have to do the full theme and have it like dong and come in. Of course, like, I'm not just going to come back all humble. I will come back. Like, I think I'm like, put it this way, I'll come back like Simple will come back when he starts playing again. I'll say I'm the best. I'll believe I'm the best. And I'll walk in like I'm the best. Even though, if you think I'm rubbish, I was always shit anyway and you'll just hate me. But what's new, right? What's new there? What's new?
We wouldn't expect anything less from you.
Right. We're ready.
And by the way, as an aside, I will just say as well, there was a couple of incidents this year that made me actually want to be. Do you know what, Janko? Normally, I don't get FOMO of like working the event. I get the FOMO of like, it's really cool if like a major's going on. Obviously, to be in the venue, isn't it? Like, you know, when you're watching the match and you hear those crowd mics of some amazing. It's not the same to be at home, guys. If you're there, you feel the electricity. You feel, holy shit, like I'm part. You actually, sometimes you even become a prisoner of the moment in a cool way. Right? That's what I normally get. But there were 2 moments recently, and you guys don't have to comment on them at all if you don't want. There was 2 moments recently that made me think I'd like to be on the desk again. So one was our mutual friend Kassad. Tell you what, you know when old HooXi tried that little sight gag of like, Part of me just thought,
I was there for it.
Part of me just thought, I wish I could just teleport next to this motherfucker now, because if people don't know, my skill set is reacting. I am an improv guy. Like, I would love to be on a desk with HooXi. Listen, mate, we can cook. I'll let you marinate too, but I will absolutely cook you after that. And then the other one, it's obvious, Maniac knows where this is going, is put me on the fucking desk with Headyear. All I'm saying is that problem is over immediately. I don't even mind, by the way, if afterwards, this is why Blair was smart. I'll take the hit Blair couldn't. I'll be thrown off the event and told I'm banned from it forever. But you know what? I'll make sure we've solved that problem forever, guys. Because there was one of the ones where it's like, the joke is, I've never even had anything approaching like an antagonistic situation on a desk personally. People might disagree with me on a point. But part of me, low-key, almost dreams of that scenario where they're just trying to go in on you and roasting the fucker. It's why I did that Shackbergs. I thought, even though actually, if you ever listen back to that clip, they weren't really roasting us. But at the time, I sort of had that feeling of like, oh, they're the jocks. And they're trying to, like, you know, fucking put us in our place because we're little nerds. So I was like, fuck this. That's why I did that, basically. So
I took it personally.
Exactly. I absolutely did take it personally. And put it this way, even though I wasn't even involved in this ESL impact, I took that personally. When she was telling Blair, like, get off the fucking desk. Like, part of me, again, just wanted so badly, like, please, just make me come on after this segment. Like, and here we have Thorin's thoughts. Like, anyway, it would be good. All I'll tell you is it would be good. It would be worth the price of admission, as they say in show business, you know. All right, what about this then? What's another team then? What's a team at the moment that's exciting? I'll tell you what, actually, Janko already opened the door. And Maniac, to be fair, we did talk about this a long time ago, because we did that whole episode. I think it was like episode 2 or something, mate, where we speculated on the whole Liquid lineup. And the joke is, that is literally the whole lineup that was always going to join and did in fact join. So it feels months ago now. Right, Janko, you hinted at it there. Dude, I feel like this is weird, because I don't know if it's like fatigue from everyone knowing the roster for months and months and months, but why is there not insane hype around this Liquid lineup? Because I'm with you, mate. When I saw this team and Zeus and all the factors, like, beyond, my one question mark really is like, will Skulls be good enough? Aside from that, I think this has like the makings of like a potential #1 team. Like, this looks really fucking dynamic, this squad. Mega powerful, all different roles. Where are you at on this?
I'm super high on Liquid as well, man, for a couple of reasons. First of all, just the lineup in itself feels very strong. Second reason is, before they did their boot camp in Netherlands, Zeus and Skulls came for like 2 weeks earlier. They were in Belgrade at my boot camp, and just Zeus wanted him to come to play a bit of FPL and just sort of, you know, get used to stuff. So we, you know, went for dinner a couple of times. I got to talk to Skulls. We never really interacted that much outside of a little bit on Pro League in like post-game interviews and stuff. And he is like, for me, I mean, he blew me away in a sense of such a level-headed kid. I mean, guy, young player, right? Incredible mindset about how he needs to conduct himself to, you know, succeed and go about his everyday, you know, work and everything along those, like a really good balance of confidence and just understanding of, he's the youngest player on the team. There's a lot to learn from. It's his first international team, but also not shying away of, oh, I don't matter in this team. No one expects me to do anything. Like, I'm going to carry my own weight. You know, I'm going to contribute to this team. English is more than good enough to be able to play on an international team too. So I'm always like very happy to see that in young players, right? Because it tells you we've turned a corner a little bit when it comes to the attitude of these players and how they come into a team, and their expectations are now managed in a sense of, hey, it's not only about how good I can click heads, like it's also about how I behave on a team, how I what my approach is to practice, both team and individual, and everything that goes along with it. So I have a lot of confidence in Skulls that he isn't going to be the problem in this Liquid lineup. Even when I spoke to Zeus, I told him, for me, there's like 2 really sort of threats to this lineup. One of them is, can Cadian do good enough on the op? And like, I think he absolutely can on the calling and leadership and all that stuff. But, you know, when you have your Zaivus, your Monesis, San Piuses on the other side, right? Yes. I don't think of it as a head-to-head duel. Just like, can you match their output in terms of impact? That's one thing. And the other thing was, can you just make a Kinder just play the game? That's it. Just focus on being the individual player, not trying to like do all this calling. Just shut up and play the game, right? Because I feel like he's been trying to do too much in this Liquid lineup, right? A little bit, probably because I think he was a little bit arrogant. I feel like he got humbled with this last Liquid experience, and having someone like Cadian in there in Zeus, because you can't forget you have Twists in there, who's also a vocal guy, 2-time Intel Grand Slam winner, all the success that he had with FaZe. So, obviously also Nav has more experience than Yikinder. You could argue he's the 4th guy down on that list who, should be speaking up about shit. So those are the 2 things for me that are only a little bit. I want to see how they pan out. I think, someone could make the case firepower in a sense of how much will you get, will you get the Twist that is like sort of the star player? I think you have to. Will you get the Yikinder from VP in terms of his fragging? Like, you also need that a little bit, because if they all average out, that could be a problem against some of the teams. But outside of that, really like how they also started their tenure as a team with the boot camp and with the part of, the no PC part. I think that's really important when you have players that haven't really played together, outside of NAF and Twists.
That's it.
Pretty much it, right? Like, and so for everyone to sort of meet each other and to set out those goals and sort of a timeline of things. Obviously, for every new team, it's not going to be, win now, right? But there also needs to be an understanding, which they have, is win at some point. Like, this team is built to win titles. Like, if we don't do that, we're going to make changes. So, like, being honest about that and laying out a sort of a blueprint, because, man, when you have players, especially when you have experienced players and veteran players, like, guys who've been doing this for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, like, it's a bit hard to get them to fucking be motivated for practice and like come in and be not just, they're not gonna take it for granted, but I mean, they're not gonna fuck around, but to get them to really engage in it and create a good atmosphere, right? I think that's why it's important for players to get along. They don't need to be brothers or best friends, but when you get into practice, it can't be like, oh fuck, like practice tomorrow again, or like this stuff again. Like, it needs to be fun for them, like engaging in some way. That's how you're going to get the most out of practice. And I think those boot camps and those conversations really help for you to bond a little bit more with your teammates and sort of have that feeling where it's like it's not that just you want to succeed, you want for them to succeed as well. Like, you want to do it all together, because no one loses on their own or wins on their own. You win and lose as a team, and creating that sort of culture and being on the same page. I think if you are aiming to be a contender team, I think it's crucial, because shit's always going to hit the fan. You're going to have Zybu win a fucking 1v4 at 10-10, but you still have money for the next round. You have a bye, they have a bye. You were on a 4-round streak before that round happened. Like, is that round going to define you, or do you know who you are regardless of what happens? Like, there's so many good players who can pull off that stuff, that it's really important mentally that you're strong and that you're doing it as a team. And that's why all these things that Liquid is doing are a good sign. I'm not saying that's going to make them the best, magically. And, it still comes down to the stuff that's
a green flag though, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Come on, Maniac, where you at on this
There's
one? Are you hyped?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm hyped just because I think from an intellectual perspective, I'm so curious about what's going to go down, right? I think there's a whole lot to unpack in what Janko just said. I agree with the mega focus on creating a team with a capital T and more than just 5 players being here and there, just mixing out together. I do think they have, with Edward Clearon, of course, they have a good guy that's with them to helping them do that. But there are a few things that we have to touch on. First of all, Caden's leadership, I think everyone has to agree what he did with Heroic was commendable. Of course, there were a couple of stains here and there, but it was very commendable. But this could not be further apart from the Heroic circumstances, what's happening here. This is the furthest apart possible. Like, literally, he went from a team of Danes that he pretty much controlled from A to Z to now putting together a mix, like a puzzle team, and having to recreate something from there. So there is still, to me, sort of a question mark. Not that I don't value him as a leader, I do, but there is a question mark to how he's going to fare in that regard. That's the first thing. The second one is, in this instance, shutting up Yikinder completely, I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think he's never going to just shut up. I think he's always going to be a piece that will have a say and will make waves in a team and one of the winning conditions for Liquid is going to be to integrate that in a way that is functional and that works. And you would think that VP did that for a while with James. It felt like they had found this sort of balance. He's going to have to do that with Cadian. I don't think there's any world in which Yakinda's just going to be a pawn and play Counter-Strike. Back in the day,
you might not know this reference, but Janko probably knows about it, even though he wasn't there himself. Right, back in the day, at the very beginning of Counter-Strike, Sir Scoots, who actually used to be a player, if people don't know, and then after that had his own team in the very early days, there's a famous thing that there'll be a picture of this on the internet somewhere, where what he did is when he would go to the LANs, to the CPLs, he had a bat, a little baseball bat. It was called the Don't Peek bat, and he would like whack you, but jokingly, like after a round if you peeked, right? And the joke was it was a way you like encourage people not to peek too much. The joke is all they have to do with Zeus, because Zeus is very much more of an authoritarian himself, is just put an S in front and then take care of that for your kind. That's the Don't Speak bat. There you go. Just play the game. You are just a brainless entry. Yeah? Just do that, by the way. You got wicked crosshair control. Just entry people, but if you start talking too much, just bonk on the head. Yeah, there you go.
Just to clarify
Go
my
to the
point,
shut-up jail.
like, I just meant he shouldn't focus on secondary
of course.
calling where, like you can talk like, yeah, you're playing this area of the map. Okay, this is how you want to attack it. It's your area of the map. But outside of that, leave it to Cadian and probably someone else. Just focus on being a player more so than having to contribute to leading the team.
I agree. I agree on that. Of course, he's never going to be just a mindless drone. That's for sure. Another point as well is that you have to think of Twist's perspective when he joined Liquid. Like it's official knowledge. It's out there knowledge that he had the possibility to go to Vitality.
Yes.
And because of what it would mean for him in terms of his position, his role in the structure, he said, nope, that's not the Counter-Strike I want to play. I want to call my own number. I think I can do more than that. And this is where I want to go. That in itself, although I do respect it, takes ego and it takes honesty to put it out there. I do respect that. That does tell me that there's going to be some level of individualism in how the game is looked at. Like, hey, I want my own shit, brother. You signed me. You know what I want to be. I want to be a superstar.
Wait, isn't that why he left Liquid for FaZe? Wasn't that
you have to take me back? I don't really remember.
Wasn't
possibly.
that some of the same reasoning? Was like he felt like he could do more on a team and didn't want to play second fiddle to Elige anymore. So he goes to FaZe, and now he was in FaZe, and now what? He feels like he was neglected there too. I mean, what's the problem here, bro?
I mean, now in Liquid, arguably he might just be the one at the very top of the ladder, right? If Yakindar has had his humble pie, now technically, arguably, Twist is at the very top of the ladder. But my point is, what I'm bearing towards is that now you're Cadian, and not only do you have to obviously create a game plan from this ragtag team that you put together, but also you're going to have to deal with individuals all around who have their own mind, have their own say, have their own needs, and then you have to come up with something that's cohesive and for everybody. And I think that is going to be hugely challenging. The quality of the pieces individually, I think, is incredible. I have no doubt about Skulls in this role. I think I come in as a sort of a rookie where people are going to tend to you just a little bit. You say he's got the right mindset. I don't really worry too much. I think he's going to deliver. I think Naf is going to do what Naf has been doing most of his career, which is to be undervalued, not exactly listened to. Not that he's talking. I'm not saying he is and people don't listen to him, but I think he's going to keep doing what he does, and he could do even more. It's more the question of how is the Cadian, Yakinda, Twist triangle going to work out? Through wins, through losses, through periods of questioning about how do we play Counter-Strike. Now, if this triangle can actually find a healthy way to work out, which is why I love the idea of, brother, don't even play Counter-Strike for a while. Just talk. Like, make sure you're on the same wavelength. Make sure you want to play the same Counter-Strike. But I don't care. You can get on the computer a little bit later down the road. Because if this triangle works, I think this is already going to solve some of the issues that this team could have. And if that works out, then with the firepower, then yeah, you get me hyped. But I'm not just going to put that on the side, be like, that's a small problem. No, I think it is. It is an actual real challenge.
Okay. By the way, on the Skulls thing, I will say, obviously, I know Zeus. I've actually been able to talk to him, and I kind of know what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to. Right, first of all, he's not an idiot. This wasn't his, like, number one choice on the fucking whiteboard, you can imagine, Janko. He had people like Elige, Kassad, like, he had the best players in the world. But the point was, when some of them either wouldn't join, some of them turned out or were vetoed and couldn't be allowed to join, when he went down the list, what he told me the selling point of this player is, like, obviously, first of all, he's Brazilian, so he has that connection. But he said, actually, one of the best things about him is that he's quite inexperienced. If people don't know, he's only really been playing like the lads we care about since like late 2022 or something. Like, he's not actually been to Lords. And he actually said one of the positive things was that this guy hasn't been in a team with the old guard who, you know, the perception in the scene is they just do things the old way and they haven't sort of updated to the current formula of CS. So his perception was like they haven't sort of been tainted by that. They haven't been given the notion that you beat. Because here's the difference. If you play a team with Fur now, it's not the end of the world if Fur like phones it in a bit. He's a legend already, boys, and won his majors and his MVPs. But if you're his teammate, you're not going to accomplish that necessarily if he doesn't go 100%. And you might also think, oh, this is what it's like to be in a top top team, right? We just, we play when it's going well, and when it's not, we just say fuck it and go home. That, I think it's actually cool that this player's going to get his chance at tier 1 in like essentially a fresh environment. And by the way, from all the things I've heard about Cadian, sounds like a great IGL to be paired with, very positive figure, Zeus himself, someone who knows how to help people, grows a place. I think that's all great. I'm not that worried. It's more just, can he do it individually? I agree with you on the twists angle though, because I mean, the first joke would be, holy shit, I knew Ziwu's cultural impact was bad, but even Cadian's is better. So twists basically chose Cadian as his AWP over Ziwu. Well, case closed on that one. By the way, don't worry, I've got an ident for my channel that I'm going to use on my next video, where I actually have Apex just introduce my YouTube channel as I'm the biggest Ziwu hater in the world, which is like, I even told him that's really good, man. I'm actually going to use that for real. Like, that's not even just a joke. That will be the intro for some of these videos. So there's that one. And then the more important thing to me is, though, I sort of agree with Maniac. And always coming from Janko, I'll ask you this question this way. Do you actually think there's anything to that? Because essentially what Maniac's doing, as far as I can tell, is he's trying to intuit, why would you pick Team Liquid, a bit more of an uncertain project, over like everyone who's joining Vitality feels like if you join, I mean, Z was the best player, you're probably going to win the tournament, like the next tournament even. Like, it's almost like the most guaranteed success you could have as a roster move right now if you're the player joining Vitality. So I know what Maniac means. I sort of had a similar thought, Yankov. Maybe the idea is when he goes back to Liquid, his old team that I'm sure is very happy to have him come back because of all the success he had without them, that maybe he does get to be top of the pecking order. Maybe he gets to call it where his roles are or what it's going to be. Whereas I got the sense part of why Carragher loves him is he was a lot more versatile in phase, and he kind of did sometimes take the backseat if it meant a Brokey or Rops needed those spots or that priority up the chain, as it were. Do you not think that's a factor? Is that something you're concerned about with twists?
I'm not really concerned. I think Liquid as an org played a big part in his decision. I think that was his first big org. I think also Liquid, anyone you talk to, they treat their players and their staff great.
Oh, sure, yes.
Also, I think he was looking forward to working with Zeus, again, who was also his first coach back in those days. And yeah, probably a little bit of everything. I feel like, I guess for what I want to see is like, you think like Twist is but a star player and FaZe and whatnot, but you look at some of the positions, he's playing like A on Nuke instead of playing Yard is the star role, but Rain was there. So Rain had some of those positions. So what I want to see now is like Twists have all those spots.
Just unleash him again, yeah?
If he gets that, then you understand that also that might have been an extra motivator for him to play in that role and do that. So with all of the above combined, right? Vitality is a set team. Like, you just need to fill this gap for them, right? Yes. And look what Mezzi is doing. I mean, he's playing anchor and all this stuff. Like, that's probably Twists. That wasn't too interesting for him because he's won, like he's won 2 Grand Slams, a major. He has the accolades. So he doesn't have to, he's not like a Robert Torrey who's just going to now go to a team and be that one piece and help a team win something. Like, he wants to see if he can do it as carrying the brunt of the load, right? And being the star player, which is legit. I respect that. Like, it's a big challenge. It's a new thing. So I guess we just have to wait and see how it pans out.
I will also say as well, if someone did see that obviously his numbers went down in FaZe to some degree as they got more and more successful, there's definitely more in the tank for Twists. Like, no, there's no way he's one of those players where I'm not a big stats guy, but like, if the stats are that low, but then you watch the game and your eyes look at how he aims, this player can definitely produce a lot more statistically. Like, he could be a star player. Like, his aim is still really crazy if you watch like a POV demo or something. Like, it's really, really crisp. So that suggests to me it's just what position you in, what support, what resources do you have? How you set up? Is there even the expectation that you're the one who's going to be the one who's going to get the frags, etc.? If that's the case in this team, and by the way, why shouldn't it be? Because the one thing I will point to, if you look at this as like a super team, if people will take that angle, is it's one of the better super team constructions, mate. There's not really many people sort of stepping on each other's toes. Whereas on the Astralis one, I could see a world where there's overlap between Blamef and Stown, or does Device just get all the say and then Stown's even further down? The difference in this team is you look at it, if you make it work right, surely this team is just sort of, you leave Naf to do what he's doing, because why would you fuck with that at all? Cadian's role's pretty set too. It's just what's his calling style going to be? Skulls, we assume's part of the aggro rifling with your Kindar, and then Twist gets to be somewhere in the middle. It sounds to me like it doesn't everyone sort of got what they want. I feel like this is also one where it's not like we're going to all have to agree on some fucked up solution, like, well, I'll compromise this, and you couldn't. It's more just sort of like, right, well, if we agree, we take these positions. If it fits together, it works as far as I can tell. It's why I actually, even though normally I thought I'd learned my lesson, which is if you make a roster where it's not an existing core you add like one player or two players to. I was trying not to make big predictions because sometimes they can fail. But I feel like of all the sort of almost made from nothing rosters, this just looks really good from the start. Like Zeus, I think's killed it. He's did a great off-season. And even the fact that despite all those months of it being rumoured, notice no one was able to take any of the players. I've heard, by the way, there was people in there trying to sign the Twists and certain other players into but they just couldn't get them. So fair play. I also get the sense, by the way, that implies everyone believes in the project. Like they all did come together months later and all signed, and they've all done it. And those videos, I don't think they're faking it, guys. They're not actors. I think they actually all genuinely all really positive about the project. Everyone.
Yeah, I think ultimately the question is when it comes to Twist is no doubt a very good player. Can he prove that he's an elite player?
Yes.
That's all it comes down to. And it's hard to say whether he will succeed or not, because when you're not put in a position to be that, it's hard to know whether a guy can pull it off or not. And ultimately, I think that's what we'll get to see in this Liquid lineup.
Yes. Right, Maniac, you suggested a roster. What's a roster you'd like to talk about?
Ooh, a roster that I would like to talk about.
Who's interesting to you?
I say Vitality.
No, I'm
you
not
can do Vitality if you want, but we'll have to take some different angles. Where do you want to go? Go on.
I would like to know where we set our expectations on the current Falcons. Because I think this honestly, it's like my brain is sort of struggling to land on like a fixed opinion, because you keep balancing between like this pre-concept of, it's a brand new team. I really don't know. And then I realized, but hold on a second. No, actually, no, it's the end score. There's like a huge basis that you can build on. And then you add Magisk to that. Immediate boost. Like Magisk is an improvement on Anchor of the Year, of course, by a landslide. And then you have the Boros, which is kind of, I don't know what the fuck Boros is gonna do. I have no idea. I don't
know if he does, quite frankly. You know what I mean?
Bro, it's like I don't know what's gonna happen with Boros. But like I struggle to set, like right now in the HT ranking, they're top 10. I struggle to set from an inner perspective my own scale of where Falcon is. Do I imagine Falcon is already going to go for playoffs? Are they not? I have a sense that with what they have now, they should already be equipped to make playoffs run from the get-go. With the end score plus Magisk in here as an immediate addition, I think they should already be equipped to make top 8 at events from the get-go. That's where I see it. So I'll open to you. I mean, Janko, you can also tell me where's your starting estimate, the starting, I would say, expectation for the Falcon project.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, their first event is now Blast. It's there with Vitality, Astralis, and OG, of course. Vitality, Astralis, Falcons in the same group. So two of the teams that we've been talking about here, Falcons and Astralis, going head to head. I think it's going to be between these two for the second spot in the group and to have a chance to qualify. But well, the way you look at it is, the end score with different coaching staff. And then you have Magisk and Boros in there. Boros, who's a completely X Factor. Magisk, who I think is probably the most underrated player when it comes to that Vitality run and how much who was contributing. When you look at the big events, the big games, that's where his experience really kicked in. The way he plays is, there's no second guessing there. It's really decisive. So I like it. Obviously, with Zonic and Lars, they know how to do these, early boot camps and how to get the team to get on the same page. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of back and forth between Snappi and Zonic, getting to the same page. And we saw when Zonic first joined Vitality, I mean, it took them a full year or so, maybe a little bit more than a year for him and Apex to come to an agreement on how they're supposed to play and how he's supposed to call. And that's when they started finding some success. So fuck me. I don't know. By the time, like, I feel like I put enough trust. I think the team is experienced and skilled enough, and that the coaching staff is obviously also experienced and skilled enough, where even with this limited amount of time, considering that the format, the DR margin, all this shit, they're still best of ones, I think, and all this bullshit, I still want to say Falcons, like, make the major, you know?
You're being fairly conservative, though. You're not going to hype them?
Yeah, well, no. I don't think they're gonna. I don't think they win an event. I don't think they upset Vitality in this first tournament, like in their blast group. They could squeak in one of those last two spots potentially, but they could also lose to Astralis, and that would be fine. I mean, it's the first tournament for the lineup. When it comes to Katowice, same thing, right? It would depend where they are with the team. Like, what is it that they're trying to do? Are they going to play the way Ents played, more or less, right? And Snappi just going to incorporate Magisk and Boros into that sort of a style? Or is it going to be a little bit of an adjustment and some of the Zonic's view of the game that Snappi is going to have to be implementing? And until we can even see that a little bit or hear it from some of the interviews, it's going to be hard to tell how much time they will need to get good. Because if it is just the end style and Snappi has to get two more guys to sort of fit into that style, then that's the faster and easier path to success, so to speak. But yeah, there's so many teams that are in flux right now that they've made at least like some small changes. So yeah, I don't see them being really a contender this early on.
The key thing for me with this roster is I actually feel like the name Falcons and that whole drama about Nico, and then they thought it was going to be like none of the players would join. I feel like that's like a smokescreen that's distracted everyone, because it makes way more sense if you look at it from this is the Ents core plus two players. That's a way easier like lens to apply to analyze the team and see what they might be like and what they can do. Because if you're looking at the idea it's like Falcons, then for example, the Nico thing skews the whole thing. Like, for example, when Snappi was joining that team, that was to get a very different squad than he had now. Like, first up point of order there was to get Nico, something Snappy's never had. Like, you know, one of the absolute, like, bona fide best players in the whole world. Well, that's a totally different ball game if you're Snappy and you're calling for a player like that, as opposed to trying to make a Spinks into that, trying to make a Nertz into that player. That's a different game completely. So, first of all, he didn't get that team anyway. So, to me, it's way more like Ents. You're in an Ents-type project, but maybe with arguably on paper slightly better players. And then, because you've kept the core, and by the way, if we're looking at the team, look, Diha obviously was incredibly influential in that team because he was there the whole time. But if you actually look at the pieces, right, the two most important pieces in Counter-Strike, in my opinion, is in-game leader and Star Orper. They've got both of those and they've already played together. Madden was basically, like, as far as I can tell, like the best fill player in Tier 1 Counter-Strike and just does whatever's left over and all the dirty work. So already he could surely walk in and make this team good. And then look, yeah, you lost Nertz, who, let's be real, stats-wise was your, like, big production guy with Sun Pius. But I'll tell you what, Magisk isn't going to put the HLTV rating of Nertz up, but he's going to bring, put it this way, if I'm going roll for win, he's better than Diha. Diha was good, but Nertz is... So here's the difference. To me, you've maybe lost some of the knockout power that Nertz had when he would pop off and be MVP, but I think Magisk actually is a floor raiser. The difference is, I could see like the baseline level of this team be really good. If you think of the core plus Magisk, I agree with you, Janko. One of the things I hate in general, I'll probably do a video on this one day, is if you want to talk about like superstar, like pressure to carry, Zero has been on some teams where he was the only player who could do it. That is true. But I always hated that even in like the original first Vitality, people just looked at the stats and they were like, oh, Alex, NBK, RPK, these are all shit players. Like, they're definitely not shit. I'll never hear the idea they are shit players. They didn't have good production numbers, guys, but they're obviously, here's the difference. If RPK is a 1.0 rating player at the time, he's not like a random tier 2 player who has a 1.0 rating. He's adding way more to the game and the team structure and the balance and the experience. Like, that counts for something. So I don't care if Magisk has like a 1.07 rating or something. His impact is way bigger in a game than just another player doing a 1.07 rating. Like, I agree. This player's a mad sleeper. either. Because what killed me about the team that won the major is they tried to make it sound like it was 2019 Vitality, like Zero just carried on his own. First of all, there's a reason Spinks was just voted 5th best player in the world, guys. Like, he's already really good. And then Magiska's like your fucking third wheel, probably the best third wheel ever in Counter-Strike. Like, he's up there for that. He's fucking sick. I even think he's a player where, because sometimes he did it on T-side, you just don't see the stats because it's not like his individual stats are skewed, but you look at the kills he would get, they'd break the whole round up, and it's part of the reason why actually some of those close games didn't get kind of squeaky bomb time against those underdog teams. He was just making sure that Zero could wake up into a game and then take over. So I think people are underrating Magiska in this lineup, mate. I was kind of, once I found out Snappi gets the end score plus Magiska, I was like, actually, they're cooking with gas here. There's something here. But the obvious problem comes down to the Boros. Look, maybe skill-wise Boros is nuts, but the problem I have is, with no disrespect, he just looked a bit brainless whenever I've seen him play. And some of the stories are sort of similar. Like, he's a bit inexperienced. He just maybe no tier 1 meta of how to play Counter-Strike. So essentially, I'm putting a lot on Zonic's plate there because it's going to depend how Boros plays too, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also a fair assumption to be made that Zonic and Snappi will help Boros sort of be a more complete player, or at least point him in the right direction.
Yes.
Right, and being able to utilize, even if it is a narrow skill set, being able to utilize it to the best of his abilities. One of the question marks for me as well is, who is the star rifler on this team? Like we just talked about, who plays Nuke Yard here, right? Like, you either go like Boros, like if you really want to put, but I feel like that's too much responsibility to put on him, right? Because those are positions where a player has to know on his own what to do, find the proper timing, right? Play off of his team and so forth. And then it's between Madden and Magisk. And Magisk did do it for a while towards the end of that Astralis team, but I feel like he would be best if he just kept doing what he was doing in Vitality. I feel like that would work best for this Falcons lineup. I would actually give more responsibility to Madden.
I mean,
in that sense,
isn't this something that, and obviously you know this guy, isn't it something I've heard behind the scenes, similar things, Janko, that people say there's way more depth to this guy's game. It's just he sort of agrees personality wise to do the sort of sacrificial roles. Like, he could essentially expand his game out a bit, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. You know, and once Ents stepped up a little bit was when they gave him a little bit more responsibility in game, and he could have some of his moves implement and not just be the bitch 100% of the time, you know? So I would like to see that, at least for this iteration of the lineup, how it pans out. It could be a bit of a trial for him in that sense, because he's also one of those guys who's vocal, right? You need to be, when you play those positions, say what you need or what you can do for the team in the mid-round, make some of those calls. So yeah, I'm interested to see how they set it up, because it's something where, like, you're thinking it should be Magisk, but just he hasn't really been in that role for a while now, like probably during his whole tenure in Vitality. It's been even Apex sometimes that's been doing that for them on the rifle, right? Like with Zywo playing the rotator with the op. So yeah, I would like it to be Madden.
So the way I would look at it is, I feel like if what you're aiming for is the maximized return and the maximum potential of this team, I do think that the end goal is to finally have Boros play these roles. Because in terms of, if we're trying to position Madden, Magisk, and Boros, and we see what's the most we can get out of them compared to their positions and roles, I feel like Magisk already, he feels the joke completely. Like, that's it. He's your anchor. There's almost no other anchor I would have.
It's like we said about Naf, right? Just leave him alone.
Exactly.
He's already doing his jobs. Let him have his roles, mate.
And I think there's a lot of comparison to be made between like the twist of phase and the Magisk Vitality, and how the numbers, you have to be very careful with how you look at them, because they have so little resources devoted to them that their numbers are actually much higher than what they look like. That's my opinion on Magisk. Okay. Then Madden, I think he could do more than what he's doing, but I do think that as a fail, again, he pushes the envelope so high up as a fail that I don't know if anybody can just step into his role and be the quote-unquote bitch of the round and still be able to have that impact. So if I'm the creator, the architect of this Falcons, my goal is to have Boros being able to handle these positions, because he's obviously got a huge mechanical skill. Everybody with two eyes can see that. But I think that in the previous Falcon project, he probably had the wrong mindset, as is, hey, this is sort of a team that I can have, so I better call my own numbers because I don't know who the hell is next to me. Yeah, this NBK guy, I kind of know him. But MHL, Longs, like, who are these guys? Like, if I'm going to get ahead and have this career, I better just really have a lot of frags. This mentality has to go straight to the trash with this Falcons team. Like, he has to be 300% more humble and be like, okay, whatever these guys are going to tell me, I am going to treat it as a religious commandment, and I'm going to follow all of this, and I'm going to try to be better and apply all of that philosophy. And if you do that, I don't know if he's capable of doing it. I have no idea. That's a big if. But if you can have this kind of mindset and listen to what Snappi would say, listen to what Zonic would say, taking all of the experience, and then sort of use his mechanical skill to apply it, holy hell. Like, of course he's going to make mistakes. Of course, he's not going to be able to make all the right decisions the way Nico would when he's playing yard, or Rain would when he's playing yard. We're not going to have that straight up. But if he's in the right mindset and he can work towards that to use his mechanical skill, that's how I would use him. The question is, are you ready to stomach some of the losses and mistakes that are going to happen along the way? And these are usually pretty costly mistakes in these roles.
By the way, since obviously I did contrast Snappi at the beginning of the whole episode with like HooXi, the person I would like to consider an upgrade if you were going to go for a player like that. I will say I actually think that I hope everyone who's hating on this Falcons lineup keeps that energy if they succeed, because the number one person who better get the credit is fucking Snappi. Because remember, the reason you all laughed at this lineup is they don't have a Nico. Well, I'll tell you what, if they have no Nico and he can actually get this team to like top 5 in the world, then he's obviously a fucking insanely good in-game leader, and these pieces are underrated. Because that's the other thing I would say about this squad is, if this team has success with this lineup without Boros developing more, or without getting a bigger name in as the rifler, this is more in the vein of actually what Heroic with KDM was like. Like, they didn't have the best players in the world. It's just that the unit was fucking awesome together. I always used to even say, like, it's why actually the Astralis thing's interesting. I always used to even wonder, like, we can't even really know on the Heroic team, how good is Stown supposed to be? Like, because he was never playing any kind of a selfish game in the same way as like trapped stars do when they're on bad lineups, you know, like he was just part of a team, and sometimes you could get lost in the floor, sometimes he could be the focal point of the floor. In this team, this is going to have to be like Snappi and Zonic are going to have to fucking do work in this team. But I also do think you've got kind of, like I say, some sleeper pieces where maybe a casual fan thinks like, oh, this is like an incomplete team. It is, but they can still do something, in my opinion. Like, the pieces are that, like I say, there's also a world where you've got to stop thinking Falcons. Think like essentially like a rework Dents, a remix Dents essentially. And yeah, there's a basis that you can walk into the first game and you've got something at least. It's not starting at 0. That counts for something, I think.
I agree. I'm going to have to see the armor. I agree with Janko in the fact that some of the events and some of the days that are coming up might be a little too close. But I also think the way, because Janko asked the question, do you want to do a remixed of ends, or you want to create something new?
Yes.
I personally think that Snappi, whatever he found in ends, whatever way of playing Counter-Strike he found, he should stick with that. It works, and it's very friendly to let this kind of mix of players of different nationalities. It's very eclectic in how he plays the game. I think this works, and I also think this is where he's the best, when he's got a couple of like great fast call, he's got some of these executes. Just follow that, right? But make sure that you integrate Magisk and his experience and his voice in these key moments. I don't think Snappi should try to completely revisit how he plays the game. I think he already nailed that pretty well in ends. And some of the failures and some of the shortcomings of that lineup, I wouldn't necessarily put on Snappi and how he plays the game. So I hope he sort of stays true to the philosophy of Counter-Strike he wants to play and just utilizes the pieces that he's got.
Well, ultimately, it comes down to, why do you think ends didn't win more tournaments?
I think some players were choking.
Yeah, I think for me, the answer is, well, some players, when I say some players, I mean, Dika didn't play up to the same level in those big games like he did in groups, and he had important positions on the team. And the other thing is, they lost to really good fucking teams who had these players. They lost in Cologne to G2, who had, you know, Nico popping off and Monacy and everyone playing really well. They lost to Vitality at Gamers 8, right, who obviously has Zywon, who were on their way up. So along the way, they were losing to teams who were better than them. And sure, at some point, you have to beat those teams if you're going to solidify yourself at that level. But before we knew it, apparently, you know, that their run came to an abrupt end. So for me, I was always impressed with some Pius. Like, really, I was even like not sure if that was going to work out for Ends. Like, how much did he really show us in Movistar? Turns out he's just a stud, you know, in big games, everything, like just a great all-around player. Snappi proven himself as a leader as well. Madden, I think, is good enough. So it's only like, how will Boros and Magus do compared to Dika and Nerds? You know, and the different like coaching, will it be able to help and sort of make them as good or potentially even better than that Ends team was? And until we see at least some of the games and get a feel for how they're playing and what we can expect from some of these players is going to be tough to know. And also the playing field is different than 6 months ago, right? Obviously you have Vitality as the undisputed best team in the world, but FaZe arguably upgraded with Frozen over Twists. G2 made a change, which seemed really questionable at the time. We'll have to see how it pans out.
By the way, I want people who remember earlier in the episode, I think Janko nailed the lens that, at least from G2's reasoning, you should apply if you're going to judge this team fairly. They're not saying Nexa actually is better than JKS and will frag more. What they're saying is JKS is somebody who required sometimes resources, whereas Nexa isn't going to. He's going to be sacrificial and sort of boost the rest of the team. That was kind of the logic, right?
Yeah. And basically sometimes going to be a little bit more aggressive,
right?
Playing by himself on the other side of the map, right? Because of what the team is doing. Now is the timing for you to go and look for a fight. And even if you lose it, it was a good call, right?
Yes.
And maybe you will win it, and that in itself will win us the round. And the timing is good for you because this player will maybe be distracted, or you'll even be able to get a little bit into the side, and he's going to come back from a rotation, things like that, where you just need to take the risk a little bit more often, and that's what they're hoping to get with Nexa.
By the way, one thing I did want to ask, because I thought I'd throw this to you, maybe it'll be like the last topic and we'll just see what everyone thinks, right? Basically, this is a pretty abstract topic, but I'll open this last can of worms, as it were. So if people saw my reflections interview I did with Zonic, where I asked him about in Vitality, like the hard times of the first year before they got Spinks, and then like what they had to change even when they got Spinks to become the team that eventually won Rio and then won the major and then was number one before he left. And he had like fixed the game, right? And he basically says that part of that struggle the first year was essentially trying to sort of make the mixed team of Vitality play like it was Astralis and kind of use the things he'd brought over from whatever he'd built up in Astralis and the thinking. And basically, it's one of the things even Apex acknowledges. Like, one of the obvious angles was Astralis famously a very slow team because they kind of read the map and they read where you are and they play off each other and they punish you, whereas he saw basically that wasn't working. It's why actually Apex actually has kind of got up in people's minds, because they clearly do play way more to Apex's style than the Astralis style. They play more of the up-tempo, quicker style. You make moves, you rely. By the way, if you have star players, you tell them take duels. Yeah, we're not going to be out-rotating people. Sometimes Spinks, if you want to take a duel, mate, we'll set you up. You win the duel, you're better than him. It's more like kind of like, I'd say, kind of almost Smash Mouth Counter-Strike. It's more up-tempo. So in some ways, I actually can also see, by the way, why maybe that isn't the long-term thing for Sonic. So my question to you two would be this. Since you've got Magisk still, who, by the way, is even called under Sonic in the past, you've got Snappi, who's a Danish IGL. Do you think that do you think Sonic wants to go more to an Astralis-style play? Do you think it would be more of a structured team now? What would you say? What would your gamble be?
He won't get it. He won't get it with Snappi. I can tell you that much. Like from talking to Snappi, Snappi is not an IGL that is going to go towards the Astralis structured, slow playstyle.
Right.
Snappi wants to play a Counter-Strike that can be fast, that can have strategies called from the first second of the round, that can have the fast pace. Right. He himself, when you talk to him, he will refer to himself as, or he will talk about Vitality as a team that sort of transition towards an ENCE-like Counter-Strike, towards a FaZe-like Counter-Strike, which is a whole lot of reliance on individuals and change of pace, change of rhythm, and fast CS. So no, I don't think Zonic is going to get the Astralis playstyle, because I also don't think it's the style that makes you win nowadays. I think you have to be able to keep some of these ideas, like optimizing the 4v2s and the 5v3s, knowing how to play with the time, knowing how to slow down a little bit. You have to be able to use that. It's part of it. But today's Counter-Strike, the winning Counter-Strike, and you can think of all the teams that won meaningful trophies last year. How did G2 win trophies? How did Vitality win trophies? There was pace and rhythm to the game that is going to be, I think, still in the identity of Snappi. So to answer your question personally, I don't think he's going to get that. He might get a little bit, but Snappi ain't about to play the Glaive Astralis playstyle.
What do you think, Janko? What would your guess be?
And he shouldn't. It's an obsolete playstyle. I mean, it were great at the time when people were doing a lot more running and gunning and were undisciplined, and that Astralis team didn't have as much talent as other lineups had. So they had to find other ways to gain an edge. And they did that. And the way teams started beating them was by doing individualistic stuff and not playing as much as a team, which was way harder to read and predict for the Astralis players. And that's sort of how their era ended, fortunately also due to COVID to a good extent. Right. So I also would hope that Zonic has learned from his time in Vitality, right? Like that's what he tried to do. It didn't work. So you can't force your in-game leader I mean, especially someone as strong-willed as Apex, but Snappi is no pushover either.
Sure.
To like play a certain way, like he's ultimately the one in the server. He has to believe with it. He has to feel the game. Like Maniac was talking, what we heard from both Snappi and HooXi and Kerrigan when we talked to them was momentum calling, especially in arena,
Yes.
in big games, right? You need to use that to your advantage. So I'm hoping that he'll sort of let him do his own thing, and then obviously with his vast experience, just sort of fill in some of the gaps and give a couple of ideas and maybe take it to the next level or perfect it in some way, right? And make it easier for the other two players to integrate into that system. I think a lot of it is honestly when you have in-game leaders who have a pretty set way of how they want to play and they just know, and they'll do all the homework for that and the preparation, right? Like your job becomes more structuring practice and making sure practice is efficient and going through some of those game scenarios when it comes to your approach and your attitude, making sure people aren't just, you know, doing some silly swings in practice that they would never do in games, and actually getting through some of those situations so that when the game comes along, you're not just doing something random. You're doing something that you reversed already that's going to alleviate some of the pressure on the players and make you play more relaxed, and in turn you're probably going to have more success. So yeah, absolutely, for me the way to go is let Snappi set it up the way he wants and you help him to do that and enable him, and you know, that's pretty much it.
Because what I'll just say is, I actually don't necessarily think that's going to be a clash. I'll bring it up as a topic because, like I say, it's sort of, they've essentially talked around that topic themselves in the past few teams. It's more the issue, like, for example, I don't imagine Zonic just said, oh, get me Snappi in and she's good. Like, he'll have had conversations with them about this topic, like, how would we run the team? What do you envision the squad would be like if we get this player? How would we... They'll have had all these convos. So I imagine they will obviously reach some sort of a compromise or a middle ground. I just bring it up because I do think that when you are people of the status of Zonic, and you've won the things you have, you listen, there's a world where absolutely you could take control of a project like this and be like, yeah, it's literally my way or the highway. It's not just my style. I invented Counter-Strike essentially. Like, I did all the things that work. Like, you're going to do what I say and you're going to make it this, and that's why I joined this team. There's a world where that can happen. Like, one of my concerns, without broaching the whole topic, just as an example, would be that's actually one of my fears I've always had about Na'Vi under Blade, is I know Blade is a very brilliant thinker, but I do think some of that is like that. Like, here's the difference. I don't think Blade would always say, my style is to do this. He's more the sort of guy who treats it like it's chess Maniac. His is sort of like, well, the correct thing is this, and it's more sort of didactic. So sometimes I do worry, to make it a jokey version of an example, that like in Na'Vi, it's like he's setting them all these exam questions, like, right, Emma, the 2 trains, one leaves Chicago and Boston at 4:45 p.m., one's trying to, and at the end it's like, so what's the top speed of, you know, the second train when it arrives at 2? And it feels like Emma answers banana, and then they go, no, like, and instead of like essentially going, oh shit, wait, he can't even get into this concept, it's like, they're like, right, well, let's just go back through the working again here, Emma. So let's start. Remember, there was 2 trains, and remember, what's the velocity? You know, it's like, and they're thinking they can didactically like make this guy go through whatever approach they want. Whereas, like, the reason I'm giving an extreme example there is, like, I think that's a good example of a team where maybe some of the pieces don't fit his vision and probably won't. So I don't think that's an issue overall, but I do think people have to shade that in. Like, one thing I think we did learn from Zonic and Vitality is, it's not just that like someone's the best coach, as in they've like completed the game and they're the final boss. They've mastered their style and they still need their personnel. I'd say, by the way, one of the things that annoys me, I'll give Janko his free NFL reference at the end here, and maybe you could all give your thoughts and then we'll end the episode. Right, I'll give you the analogy like this, Janko. Even though people know my feelings about Tom Brady, I'm not a hater as well. I also do acknowledge he was a very good player, and especially if you go like 15 years back, he was one of the best players just in the NFL. He was just stud. But one thing I hate is that people who like Tom Brady have to now say that like Bill Belichick did nothing, right? So when they see these years where he had like fairly bad or average quad, they just go, well, this proves it. He was rubbish. He was never a good coach. And it's like, well, no, because the point is we're not saying he was like a 100 out of 100 in every area and you could give him any piece and he wins. He clearly himself needs specific pieces and a specific to enable his style. And if he can't enable his style, and by the way, the joke of that team is they even actually were still all right on defense most of the time, which is his main strength. So I would just say, I think people sometimes take these coaches and really act like they've completed everything in Counter-Strike. Like, even Zonic is just a guy who has his style, his strengths, and you've got to give him the right pieces, in my opinion. What would you say on this, guys, as a final thought?
Yeah, I think also when you were making the EMA analogy and with Blade, when he comes in and says, okay, this is the situation, this is what the answer is. I don't think there's ever like just one answer. That's for example, our MIBR team, the mix with the S2E10 and the Brazilians, right? Notoriously, the style of that SKLG team was very slow, patient, methodical, default, spread around the map, right? While the Americans on the other side, it was pacey. It was, okay, we get a kill here, let's just press the advantage. And both things can work. Like if you get an entry kill, you can just speed up like there, especially if you see, oh, we killed the like B rotator, let's just speed up on B. There should only be one guy there, main point being should, right? Like you don't know exactly how they opened up or whatever. And the other thing can be, hey, we got an entry, there's still like 1 minute left on the clock. Let's play it slow, freeze, see if they react. Maybe they try to make a move to even out the numbers. We get one more kill, right? Which at the time was the superior way of playing, absolutely. Yes. So the problem was, whatever the situation is, if you do one or the other, but everyone does that thing, it can work.
Yes.
That's for the same exact situation. Like you can win the round both ways if you play it that way. But if 2 guys are speeding up and 3 guys are holding, that's when you get into trouble, right? Like, so I think that's the goal for any team, is figure out, like depending on the players you have, come up with a way that suits your team best to play in those scenarios, and then that's just the way that your reactions are going to work.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the last point. I think there has to be an adequation between players, how they want to play the game, and the coach, of course. I also think that for longevity's sake of a coach, the question is also, can you adapt? Because I think even though there is different ways to play Counter-Strike, I do think every era has its meta. It has the most effective tactic available. I think it does exist to an extent. And if you want to be a coach and have a years-long career, you cannot just say, well, my style is this, and that's how I want to win the game, and that's it. Like, you have to have sort of an ability to be a little bit flexible, to lean towards maybe a faster CS, a more structured CS. And I hope that for zonic, the Vitality experience sort of taught him that. I don't think he's a finished product, even though he is the winningest coach out there and he's proven his ability 1,000,000 times over. Part of it is also saying, okay, this is where the game is going now. I'm going to keep this side of how I want to play the game. And I'm going to integrate this idea, this concept. That's what's working now. That's how teams are winning. So being able to display that flexibility is going to allow you to keep on going, to keep on winning, because the other qualities he definitely has. So I agree. I think he's not a finished product.
And also, absolutely, Duncan, to actually answer your question, is there are different types of coaches who have their strengths and weaknesses. And that also depends. That's why we talk about coach in-game leader duo, right? Like they need to work together and be complementary, and different in-game leaders need different types of coaches. Also depends on the team. Do you have young players who need to be taught certain elements of the game? Do you have veteran players that you just need to sort of work on their motivation and drive and putting them in a position like to succeed, like getting them into the playoffs where they will do most of their work? I thought it was a fucking disgrace when it came to last year's Coach of the Year, right? That Robin didn't win, because there's this perception, right? Because Kerrigan is the in-game leader, that he's just like a fucking cheerleader, which also, to my point, even if he fucking is, right? That's what
they need. Yeah,
that's what the team needs more than anything, and that's what you saw, how much their performance plummeted when he departed the team.
Yes,
like they were stunned, like they didn't know what to do, like they fell off a cliff completely when that happened. So obviously Blade is a guy who's really a lot about the X's and O's, right? And that's how he's very like regimented about it, like he doesn't really, there's no discussion with Blade. He's like, you're doing this, bro. Like, that's how we're playing. This is how I want you to react in this situation, and that's what you're going to do, and that's what some players need, and that's what helps also some players, like it's not up to them. This is what you do, and it takes a little bit of responsibility from them, and allows them to play a little bit freer. A lot of the times, you need to be a mix of the two, which is, for example, what I see zonic as, a guy who, when the game goes live, he's just a big cheerleader, a big motivator, right? But for sure, when you're not live and you're practicing and stuff, is also helping with the game and the planning, doing a really good job at preparing for opponents, right? Finding weaknesses in their opponent's game, like all this stuff. There's so many different elements, and yeah, just because you're good at one thing doesn't necessarily mean you're good at everything. And because you would be a good coach for this one team doesn't mean you would fit well with a different lineup.